masks. He lied about social distancing. He lied about the transmission. He lied about natural immunity. He lied about the capacity, as you just said, of the vaccine to prevent infection. He got vaccinated at a very, very public press conference in January of 2020. And then 5 months later, he had, and this is the first time that we knew this from the diary, he had a pulmonary infarction, which is one of the adverse events that NIH, CDC, and FDA said are expected from the vaccine.
Okay, well, that was Robert Kennedy Jr. on the man who we're going to be talking about. Welcome to FinFlam Unfiltered. I am your host, Big John. Today, we're going to spend some time on one man and one set of documents that have just been made public. Dr. Anthony Fauci. The diary entries, how they were released, what they actually say, the upcoming face-to-face with Senator Rand Paul, what guilty even means in this context, how a presidential pardon works, and what it does and does not cover. School closures, masks, myocarditis, vaccine injuries, and the private fascination with fame that shows up in the man's own words. I will move quickly. I will read key passages. I will put the private writings next to the public statements. I will explain the legal process in plain language. By the end, you should be able to walk someone through the entire sequence without looking anything up. This is not a short hit piece. This is the long version. Let's go. So who released the diary and how? In late July 2026, Senator Rand Paul, chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, released more than 1,000 pages of what he states are Dr. Anthony Fauci's personal diary entries covering the years 2019 through 2022. Paul posted the material on his Senate website and on social media. He framed the release as evidence that what Fauci wrote privately and what he told the country are two different stories. The timing was deliberate. Fauci had been subpoenaed to appear before Paul's committee on July 29, 2026. The diary dump came days before tomorrow's hearing. These are not leaked emails from a third party. According to Paul, these are near daily notes Fauci kept while serving as director of NIAID and later as a key White House advisor. The entries include meetings, phone calls, media appearances, personal observations, and reflections on his own rising public profile. Paul's office made the documents available for public view. That's how they entered the public domain. No court order wasn't necessary for the release. The chairman of a Senate committee with subpoena power obtained and published them ahead of sworn testimony. The school closure contradiction. One of the clearest clashes between private writing and public statements involved school closures. In a March 15, 2020 diary entry, Fauci wrote that he spoke with the New York City mayor, Bill de Blasio, and convinced him, based on what I was saying publicly and my conversation tonight, close the New York City schools, quote, end quote. He noted that de Blasio had already been leaning that way because of Fauci's television appearances, but the phone call sealed it. In the same entry, he records a similar call with Ann O'Leary, the chief of staff to California Governor Gavin Newsom. According to the diary, O'Leary said the governor had decided to close California schools, bars, and restaurants based on Fauci's recent TV appearances. The next day, Fauci recorded official guidance, quote, to close schools where there is community spread, end quote. Years later, in public interviews and testimony, Fauci stated that he had nothing to do with school closures and that decisions were made by local officials. He also said the initial closures were correct, but keeping school closed for an extended period was not a good idea. The diary entries show him actively urging and taking credit for influencing major mayors and governors in real time. That is the contradiction Paul intends to put in front of Fauci under oath. Now we're about to stir the pot right here. The origins of the virus. This is one of the most important single entries in the entire file dump. On January 31st, 2020, still very early, Fauci records a private discussion with top virologists, including input connected to Jeremy Farr of the Wellcome Trust. In his own diary, he writes that the scientists were focused on the furin cleavage site. He notes that this feature raised real doubts about a natural origin. According to the entry, roughly half the scientists on that initial call believed that the virus looked constructed. Fauci writes that they brought up the possibility that this could have been deliberately inserted and then either accidentally released or deliberately released by someone in the lab. Let me say that again slowly. In his private diary on January 31st, 2020, Anthony Fauci is writing that leading scientists were telling him the furin cleavage site made the virus look constructed and that lab release, accidental or deliberate, was on the table. But what did he say publicly for months and years that followed? He has repeatedly told the country that the virus was totally consistent with a natural animal-to-human jump. He dismissed the lab leak theory. He treated it as a fringe idea, a conspiracy theory, something that distracted from the science. He told Congress and the public the science was settled in favor of natural origin. Privately, on day one of serious discussion, half the experts in the room were telling him it looked engineered. That gap is not a small inconsistency. That is a foundational contradiction between what the nation's top infectious disease official wrote in his own diary and what he told the American people for years. Expect Rand Paul to put that January 31st entry next to the public statements and ask Fauci to reconcile them under oath. Now, related to this, in a January 26, 2020 entry, Fauci already notes that the first infection occurred in December and was not connected to the Hunan market. He writes that the market was not the source, it was the amplifier. Public messaging for a long time still centered the wet market as the likely origin point. The diary shows Fauci knew early the timeline and the location did not line up with the simple market spillover story. Here's where it gets even more bizarre. The fame entries. The diary is not only about policy, large sections track media coverage of Fauci himself. In March 2020, he wrote that the press is going wild with me. He noted a front-page Washington Post article and a Marine Dad column in the New York Times. He described the situation with his national and international fame as explosive and really unimaginable. In one entry, he stated that it was not hyperbole to say that today I am the most famous and talked about person in the country and one of the most recognizable persons in the world. He recorded that President Trump seemed enamored of him, even while Fauci was taking the spotlight. Later entries continue the scorekeeping, which shows which magazines, which celebrities wanted to talk to him. At the same time, the death counts and the economic damage were climbing. The diary keeps returning to the media temperature around Anthony Fauci. Critics read this as narcissism in the middle of a national crisis. Supporters say any human in that position would notice the attention. The diary simply records how much mental space it occupied. Next, the Trump confrontation. Fauci records an Oval Office outburst. Trump accuses Fauci and Deborah Birx of destroying the country with their lockdown and shutdown advice. Fauci writes that he reassured Birx they would be okay, that they would still be valued by the people who mattered. The entry captures tension between the public health advice and the economic and political reality the president was facing. It also shows Fauci privately managing the fallout while continuing to push the same policies in public. Now, this is where Fauci went from Fauci to Wacko Jacko. Early in the pandemic, Fauci and other officials publicly discouraged the general public from buying masks. The stated reasons were shortage of supply for healthcare workers and limited evidence of benefit for asymptomatic people. In a well-known 60 Minutes appearance, Fauci said there was no reason to be walking around with a mask. By early April 2020, the guidance reversed. Fauci became one of the most trusted and strongest public advocates for universal masking. He later explained that the change came from new information about asymptomatic spread, which improved supply. The scientific debate over cloth and surgical masks for community use never fully settled. Randomized trials and observational data produced mixed results. Some studies showed most modest reductions in transmission under ideal conditions. Others found little measurable population level effect. Fauci's early caution and later certainty both became political weapons. The diary release does not contain a smoking gun confession or mask, but it sits inside a broader pattern of public statements that shifted while private confidence in the underlying evidence remained contested. How can Americans truly have trusted this man? Myocarditis and vaccine risks. Myocarditis and pericarditis after mRNA COVID vaccination are documented, especially in adolescent and young adult males after the second dose. The CDC and the FDA added warnings. Rates were higher than background levels. Most cases were mild and resolved, but a subset required hospitalization and a smaller number had lasting effects. Fauci and federal health agencies initially emphasized the rarity of these events relative to COVID risks. Over time, as more data accumulated, especially in low-risk age groups, the risk-benefit calculation for healthy young people became the subject of intense argument. Excess non-COVID deaths, sudden cardiac events, and long-term safety monitoring remain active areas of research and political dispute. The diary entries released so far do not appear to contain detailed private assessments of myocarditis. The broader record shows Fauci defending the vaccine strongly in public, while the signal for myocarditis was still being quantified. That gap between emerging safety data and public messaging is one of the core criticisms Paul and others intend to press. Continue on. The record destruction issue, separate from future diary passages, were released and highlighted by Paul in the same investigative package, evidence that Fauci directed NIH staff, including then-Director Francis Collins, to delete emails and destroy records. Paul cites specific instructions along the lines of read this and then delete it. Federal record-keeping laws require preservation of official communication. Paul argues this is a direct violation and a part of a broader pattern of concealment. The diary release is being used to show the private mindset. The deletion evidence is being used to show the operational cover. Fauci has previously denied destroying records under oath. Paul intends to confront him with both the diary contradictions and the deletion trail in the same hearing. As we all know, Anthony Fauci was pardoned by the Biden administration. In January 2025, in the final hours of his presidency, Joe Biden issued a preemptive pardon to Anthony Fauci. The pardon covers any federal offenses Fauci may have committed or taken part of from January 1st, 2014 through the date of the pardon that arose from or related to his service as an AID director, White House Coronavirus Task Force member, or chief medical advisor. Presidential pardons for federal crimes are nearly absolute. Congress cannot simply veto a pardon. The power is unilateral. A pardon can be challenged in limited circumstances, but ordinary political disagreement is not enough. What the pardon does not cover in the future is future conduct. If Fauci testifies under oath on July 29, 2026, and makes false statements, that is the new potential crime, perjury. That falls outside the 2025 pardon. That is why the hearing matters. Paul cannot undo the pardon for past acts. He can create a new record under oath and, if the evidence supports it, refer false statements for prosecution. There is no grand jury convened by Rand Paul. Senate hearings are not grand juries. Paul has said he will present the diary entries and other documents methodically, confront Fauci with the contradictions, and force answers on the record. That is a process available to a Senate chairman. It is political and investigative, not a criminal trial. Any criminal referral would still have to go through the Justice Department. Fauci is scheduled to appear tomorrow, July 29, 2026, before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Paul has made clear that he intends to walk through the private diary entries side by side with public statements on schools' origins, gain-of-function research, and record-keeping. Paul's approach has been consistent for years: obtain documents, release them, then force the witness to reconcile the paper trail with prior testimony. He has accused Fauci of directing the destruction of records in the past. The diary release is the latest chapter in that document-driven strategy. Whether this procedure produces a perjury case of political reckoning or simply another contentious hearing remains to be seen. The diary has already shifted to public record. The sworn answers will determine the next step. In closing, the diary entries show a senior official who recorded his own influence over school closures while later minimizing that role, who tracked his celebrity with unusual intensity, who privately noted that scientific concern that the virus looked constructed, who knew the wet market was not the original source, who documented a presidential confrontation over the economic damage of the policies, and who operated inside a system that later required preemptive presidential pardon. Masks, myocarditis, and vaccine remain contested scientific and policy questions. The private writings do not settle every scientific debate. They do expose gaps between what was said in private and what was told to the public. Rand Paul has the documents, the subpoena, and the hearing. The pardon protects past federal acts. It does not protect false statements made under oath. That is a state of play. The hearing will tell us whether the contradictions hold up under the examination or not. Thanks for being here with me. I'm Big John. We will follow the testimony and the filings as they develop. Put that man in jail. That's where he deserves to be. This has been FinFlam Unfiltered.